Okay, Megan Dollar for CML.
Here.
Cheryl Garcia is here. Tim Kunkelman or Wes Horn? They're not here.
And also remember to start.
I've been sending it.
And also remember to start to unmute because it mute people automatically.
Right. So those of you who have joined, if you need to unmute, it's *6 to unmute. When there's a lot of people, it automatically mutes everyone when you join. So please remember that if we can't hear you, that's probably why, and use *6 to unmute. Also, if you're using both the phone and the computer, make sure to turn the volume all the way down in your computer or we'll get echo. Try it one more time. Tim Kunkelman or Wes Horn? Tim Rasher?
On the phone?
Mary Jane? This morning we had heard Tim. Are you filling in for Wes as highlight representative as well? Yes. Charlotte Joseph, I heard on the phone. This position is vacant. Monica Bacon,
Here.
wireless. Monica. Ray Patton's here, I think I saw him. Or no, I heard you on the phone. Ray, on the webcast. Jay Slater or Aaron Harris?
Jay Slater's on the phone.
Thank you, Jay. Phil Campbell?
Remotely present.
Was that Phil?
Yeah.
As much as I can be, yes.
Okay. Lori McCarty or Tim? Nothing heard. Don Collins or Danette Martin?
Dawn is here.
Hi, Don. Kimberly Culp is here as well as Tracy Oldmeyer. Betty DeShazer or Jackie Reynolds?
Excuse me, Betty DeShazer's here.
Hi, Betty. Beth Dobransky?
Hey.
We have Beth Dobransky. Okay, nothing heard. Bruce Romero or Paul Smith? Nothing heard.
Hey,
Lisa?
hey, Daryl. Beth Dobransky, I'm here.
Hi, Beth. Thank you.
No problem.
Alicia Librand or Paula Null?
Kayla Friend is here for Valicia.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Irvin?
Present.
Connie Johnson or Phil Campbell? I know Phil Campbell is here, but is Connie?
Yes, I'm on the phone.
Thank you, Connie. Paula Creasy is here. Athena Butler or Shelley Lesnansky? Nothing heard. Vicki Pickett?
On the phone.
Thank you, Vicki. Scott Newman is in the room. Sean Shear or Brandy Seaton?
Sean Shears here.
Hi, Sean. Carl Simpson or John Lofgren? Nothing heard. Carl Stevens is here. Patty West is here. That gives us 83% of voting members. So we do have a quorum, and we do have a supermajority if necessary, although I don't think we have any that on the schedule today. And Carl, do you want to do, last time we just did a, for non-voting members, we just had them email in. So
Yeah, that'd be fine.
List. Is that okay with you? Okay.
And we do have a PUC commissioner in the room as well as on the line.
Correct. We do have two commissioners with us today, so we noticed the meeting to follow all the rules. In the room, we have Commissioner Francis Concilia, and we have Commissioner John Gavin on the phone. Welcome. So for those of you who are on the phone or in the room and are non-voting members, please email me, darwayl.branson@state.cu.us to let me know you're on the phone so we can create a full roll call for the day. Starting with the next meeting, I'm going to be trying an electronic sign-in sheet. It will just be a form that you can go in and say that you're here, and that will fill the list automatically. But for this meeting, just send me an email, and I'll build that list between now and the next meeting. And So that's roll call. Carl, do you mind if the commissioners have a moment to
No, go ahead.
say a few words if they wish to? Commissioner Celia?
I'm just glad to be here and participate, see what I can do to help you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Commissioner Gavin?
Yes, happy to be here as well. Thanks very much, Daryl.
You're welcome, and welcome to both of you. Carl, I think it's yours.
Okay, approval of minutes from the March 2019 meeting. Can we get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Kimberly motion second. Cheryl seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. On reports, PUC staff update.
So the first section of the staff update is the federal 911 grant program. This section is already out of date. So we did file on April 5th the application to the federal 911 grant program. We've had them come back a couple of times with questions or issues they had with our application. The most recent is frustrating simply because I don't necessarily agree with how they're interpreting their own rules. Their rules state that they will pay for ongoing costs of NG 911 implementation. But when we filed our application, they came back and said that they did not want to pay for monthly recurring costs, which was a big part of our application. Yes,
Cheryl, I only want to caution because we do have 2 commissioners here today, and we will probably have a filing before those commissioners in the next few days that we just organize the discussion on this one accordingly, so there isn't
okay.
pre-done.
Thank you, Lynn.
You bet.
Or
take it later, however.
Well, so with that said, there was an emergency webinar held Friday that a lot of you attended. So we won't go into details of what was discussed in that emergency webinar. If you were not able to attend that, if you're a 911 authority or a PSAP and were not able to attend that, I did record it so I can send you a copy of that or a link to it. But the fix for this was discussed during that webinar. And it is my hope that we will still be able to receive the full $2.4 million in federal funds or very close to it as part of the application after we make some changes to that. And I think that may be all I can say.
Well, and Daryl, perhaps, I don't know if either or both of the commissioners are planning to stay all the way to the end of it. Maybe we can just take it to the end of the agenda if anybody does have any questions or go into it.
That would work.
All right, thank you.
Second item at the only ongoing proceeding we have right now that affects 911 in Colorado other than the surcharge application is the 911 reliability proceeding. We've been meeting roughly every 2 weeks for that meeting, for that series of workshops. There was a update filed, so part of the decision from the commission that created these workshops required that a update be filed every 2 months. So there was an update filed at the beginning of May, right?
Yes,
May 1st. So you can check that out for information. But these meetings are open, other than the fact that an NDA is required. We're not keeping anyone out of it. So if you are interested in participating in these meetings, just let me know, and I can get you a copy of the NDA so that can be filed. There is some security sensitive information that is discussed as part of these workshops, which is the reason for the NDA. However, the purpose of these meetings is to, as it states in the decision from the commission, to return to the commission with a plan for how to better improve 911 reliability and diversity in the state in the basic emergency service network. So if that is something that you would like to be part of, feel free to email me and let me know, and we can get you a copy of the NDA. Does anybody have any questions, or anybody who's part of that proceeding have anything they wish to add for those workshops?
I just wanted to add a comment. This is Kimberly with WIDA. For the 911 authorities and PSAPs, I just want to encourage you to attend this discussion and be part of the discussion. This could result in another tariff or an addition to the tariff. So financing, funding, reliability, diversity in and out of your PSAP, this is critical information. And it's always surprising how few authorities and police officers participate in this. So we're going to be making decisions of a recommendation that's going to go forward, and your voice is critical in this. So I just encourage you to participate. I know there's a lot of time involved, but this is 911, so there isn't anything more important than this as it relates to the DSAP, trying to get this right. So please join us. At least call in and for a little bit.
And from the provider perspective, I second that. More participation we can get.
Especially since a lot of what we're going to be talking about, that would kind of set the framework for the rest of the discussion. We're really going to be getting into specific instances where there is a need for improved reliability or diversity in the 911 network. So having people from those particular areas that we're going to be talking about participate, we can reach out to them individually. But having people from those areas participate will be crucial because they'll have information about what local resources they have available to them that we may not have otherwise.
Well, and Daryl, I'm just going to add to just process-wise, as Kimberly mentioned, at the end of this could either modify the tariff or have another tariff element. We're going to need to take that through the commission and gain their approval. And the hope is really that it is largely all figured out and agreed to through this process, so that procedural piece of it can be very efficient. So it would be unfortunate if all of a sudden people didn't, kind of realize or participate what was happening and then feel like they needed to catch up at the end and potentially drag out that piece of it. So we're spending a lot of time up front, hoping that that it can really be kind of as short as possible on the back end and just get moving for the implementation. So another reason to get involved early.
On to federal rulemaking, there is a new item on here since the last report. That is a request for comment on several proposals regarding improvement of the wireless resiliency cooperative framework. For those of you who don't follow FCC items that closely, congratulations. But also the wireless resiliency cooperative framework is a cooperative agreement put together by a number of the major wireless carriers regarding how they would help or facilitate or expedite, I think is the word I'm looking for, memorandum of understanding and roaming agreements between carriers in the event of a natural disaster or emergency that causes that to be necessary. So if there's a hurricane, for instance, on the East Coast that takes out a number of cell towers, they have this resiliency framework in place to help expedite the implementation of roaming agreements more quickly to allow users of one network to use towers that are normally reserved for another carrier. So there are a number of proposals that the FCC received to improve that, and they put out a request for comment on those proposals. When I sent this out, if you look where it says request for comment, that's a link, so you can go directly to that, click on directly on that link to see the full proceeding, or you can just go to the FCC's ECFS, is that their system? The electronic comment filing system.
Not so easy to use Daryl's link.
Not as easy to use as Daryl's link maybe, but in case the link doesn't work for some reason, you can go to PS11-60 in the ECFS and pull up that information. And that's the only active federal proceeding right now that we're watching. There are always a number of FCC proceedings that are open because they don't ever really close them regarding 911, but that's the only one that has a request for comment or comment cycle currently open.
Daryl?
Yes.
On the vertical location accuracy, there's a comment date of the 15th of this month.
Okay, so I missed one, thank you. So the vertical location accuracy proceeding, do you know the number on that by any chance? If not, I can.
Not offhand.
Okay.
It's the fourth further notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay, I'll look that up and send it out to the group afterwards. Does anybody know about any other federal proceedings that we're not aware of here? Federal legislation. Couple of items, though, the ones in red are the ones that changed since the last time this report came out. The one in blue changed even after I sent this report out to the group. So probably going back and just talking about the changes, the Anti-Swatting Act of 2019 actually did see some movement on that. So it was referred to the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. What that act would do is provide some additional federal charges or felonies that could be applied to people who commit acts of swatting, which is basically making a false phone call to a 911 call center in an attempt to create a police response. So that has seen some movement, as well as the Kelsey Smith Act, which requires providers of a covered service to provide location information concerning telecommunications device of the user. The short of this is it requires what a lot of carriers already do, which is if you send in exigent circumstances, they will tell you the location of a cell phone caller. This actually makes it a requirement rather than a voluntary thing. This has seen a little bit of movement it's been read twice and then referred to the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. The 911 Saves Act, which Monica talked about at the last meeting, but I didn't have on my list yet. This requires the Director of the Office of Management and Budget to essentially change the classification for 911 telecommunicator from a clerical categorization to a public safety categorization, which could have effects, especially in other states where they use that OMB classification to determine pension plans and things like that. It could really help them, but it generally makes it easier to make the argument that 911 telecommunicators are a professional classification of public safety and not just another type of 911 operator, or excuse me, telephone operator. That currently has been read twice and referred to the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. The National Green Alert Act of 2019 would establish an interagency committee on the development of green alerts that would be activated when a veteran goes missing. So we know about Amber Alerts. There's Silver Alerts that some states use for elderly individuals who have gone missing. You've got Blue Alerts for law enforcement officials who have been subject to violence, to put out a Blue Alert regarding the person that assaulted them. And now this would be a new type of alert called a Green Alert that would be put out when a veteran goes missing for other purposes. On March 7th, that was read twice and referred to the Committee on Veterans Affairs. And then there's the 911 Fee Integrity Act, which would direct the FCC to promulgate rules within 6 months designating the acceptable use of 911 fees by any state or taxing jurisdiction. In April, this was referred to the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. What exactly this would mean, I think, it remains to be seen. It's a very short act. It's only one page. It doesn't really say what application this list would have once the FCC puts it together. It does require the FCC to create this in conjunction and with input from 911 experts. So my guess is that they would probably put together a working group or task force to try to work on language for this if this act passes. At the very minimum, this might help the FCC when it does its Net 911 Act reports to Congress, because right now every year the FCC requests data from the states on how much they have received or collected in 911 surcharge fees and how those fees have been spent. And part of their report to Congress is X number of states have spent funds in a way that is not compatible with their state statute regarding how 911 fees should be spent. But a simple way around that for some states is just to change their statute to allow them to use the 911 surcharge fees for things that you wouldn't normally think that a state should use 911 surcharge fees. So this would create a baseline for that, but on the other end of that, the other extreme of that, I think there might be some concern that the FCC could try to say that this is the only way that states can spend 911 surcharge fees once they come up with this list. There are some 10th Amendment issues there, I think, potentially, but we'll be watching this to see exactly how they implement this, assuming that the act passes. And if the act doesn't pass, then it will be a moot point, but we'll be watching that closely. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts on any of these? Particularly on that last one, I think is one that we're going to have to watch very closely.
Everyone else got this.
Cheryl?
In case you have not taken the active threat training, the Red Cross is putting looks like four different classes at various times between now and February 2020 on active threat, stop the bleed, hands-only CPR, and disaster mental and behavioral health. So Cheryl has the flyer here if anybody would like to see it. Okay.
Cheryl, do you have a digital copy of that flyer you can email me?
Yeah, she will get
I'll
that
send it out
to
to the group. Sounds good. Any other thoughts or comments on federal legislation? Colorado legislation, I think we're officially adjourned now, correct?
Yes.
So of the bills that we were tracking, established Colorado Fire Commission, does anybody know the final outcome of that? Was that passed?
Yes.
That was passed, thank you. And do we know, Carl, I think you were tracking this, do you know if if 911 centers ended up with a seat on that committee, or maybe Megan, you know?
It's a seat, but I don't know if it's voting or not. I know there's some discussion about whether or not to have it as voting or not.
I can check.
Okay, thank you.
But when they were working on that, speaking to the director of, they were looking at using this task forces to appoint a member for that group.
Okay. That'd be nice. Like that. House Bill 191087 was a local meeting public notices posted on the website is the short title. It doesn't affect 911 directly, but for those 911 authorities, which is I think pretty much all of them that have public meetings on a regular basis, this bill made certain requirements about how those notices are posted and how those notices can be searchable online. So you might want to take a look at that. The governor did sign that one, so that did pass. The Public Safety Communications Subcommittee was up for sunset this year. It passed. And Glenn, I don't think there were any changes to your charter or anything, were there?
The only thing it changed was they removed the sunset clause from the legislation, so we won't have to face this again in future years.
So you have been renewed in perpetuity.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Limit encryption of dispatch radio communications. This is similar to a bill that was introduced last year that would have limited the ability of public safety agencies to encrypt their radio channels. This was postponed indefinitely, so I believe it didn't go any further than that. Getting the thumbs down sign from Megan. So, given that this is 2 years in a row, I guess we'll have to watch for that next year and see what happens.
Actually, Darryl, if I may.
Yes.
So from CML's perspective, this may be one of those bills, it's the media we continue that we'll have to work on in the interim capacity. So to the extent that anyone in this room is interested in it, then we put together via CML a working group to kind of work on some issues in there. I'd be obviously excited to come through.
Right, and the chair of the PSCS met with Representative Singer from Boulder, who was one of the early sponsors of this legislation, and they're considering getting together and formulating some sort of legislation that would be acceptable to the public safety communications community, but also would help the media, but with more of a focus on local control, local decision making as far as encryption, rather than making a blanket one-size-fits-all from the state level.
Right.
So that those discussions should be happening sometime over the next several weeks.
I know the PSCS was very locked in on this item too. Spent a lot of time looking at language.
They did.
And other issues, so that's good. Tim?
Senate Bill 40, only 24 on that.
Oh.
Not 30.
Oh.
Come on, it's a very small. Yes. And one member, the other 23 members we don't need to talk about. There's one member of the 911 Advisory Task Force established by the Public Utilities Commission that would be appointed by the executive. I presume of the fire commission, but the way that it is.
We'll have to look through that. So
Well,
it has
the
another member of the
executive
commission
director is the Stan Hilke. That's the what emergency
Department of Public Safety.
Department of Public Safety.
This is under the.
And then the other ones are called directors. So
be appointed by
Stan, I'm guessing.
So it sounds like what we'll have to do is nominate a member to them, and then he appoints them.
Yeah, probably.
He can appoint someone else if he wants to, but at least make a suggestion to him. Is there? I'll look at that later, see if there's a deadline on that, or I don't know if we need to make a decision today on that. Or.
And I can also get with the state fire.
I don't see a deadline, but it's signed yet. So.
Oh, okay. So we'll wait that, and then maybe at the next meeting we can have that on the agenda to nominate someone.
It doesn't become effective until August, even if it's signed.
And the last item that I had on here was the sunset for the Public Utilities Commission. Those of you who don't know what sunset is, because we already talked about with the Public Safety Communications Subcommittee, most agencies or government programs under the state have a sunset period, so that every certain number of years, and the number of years varies, that agency or program has to be reviewed by the legislature to see if it's still necessary, or if there are any changes that should be made to how that program or agency is operated. The short summary of this is that the legislature did continue the Public Utilities Commission for another 7 years, which we're also a constitutional agency, so they had to renew us for something. But they did make some legislative changes, and I wonder if Mr. Cecilia or Gavin or if Lynn here would like to speak to any of those changes as they relate. Because there are a lot of changes that don't relate to telecommunications that we can probably skip over today, but if the ones that relate to telecommunications, can you speak on those?
Sure. So yeah, so it was a very short list as far as telecommunications is concerned. There was a generic change in there that had to do with noticing on electronic noticing to customers around some rate change thing, and I think that applied to all the utilities and how you notice them electronically and things like that. I think probably primarily driven. Well, a lot of that was primarily driven with energy things in mind. The other telecom changes were really cleanup from the major 2014 legislation, where they left a bunch of inconsistencies in the statutes. So really, any of the substantive things we thought about and had discussions with the sunset review team did not find their way into the bill. And so really, from a telecom perspective, I say unless I'm not thinking of one, it was fairly generic. Probably some of the bigger ones and overarching ones were some of the things there was back and forth during the bill as to whether to take step out and create us as a different agency underneath Dorrance and things like that. And at the end of the day, we were left where we're at. Thanks very much to the work of our commissioners and particularly Francis in working to try and bring some sanity around that topic. So a lot of up and down, but I don't know if there's anything else you can think of.
Well, I would say that it was President Garcia, a friend of mine from Pueblo, who really insisted that it stay as a technical agency, so that it was independent. It was not just another political agency. Without Leroy's help, we made the Tech 2 agency. I was also testified as the Tech 2. On the Thursday before the final day of the session, when it was in the House, 2 other bills were folded into it. These are all energy policy, 13 and 67. So it is now an 81-page bill, and we're taking bets as to whether or not there will be a constitutional challenge to it that violates the city subject, and what court will do. But We've got 7 years as a type 1 and these cleanup things.
For those of you who want to know more about how the process works, there is a state agency. I never remember what it stands for. It's COPRRR. We just call it COPR, but it's the Colorado Office of Policy, Research, and Regulatory Reform that does these reviews of all state agencies and programs when their sunset review comes up. They did a lot of interviews within the PUC and outside of the PUC with a number of stakeholders. Some of you may have been interviewed by them for this process. We did, the telecom section did make some recommendations, some even regarding 911, specifically working off of the recommendations that were in the state of 911 report to the legislature that was delivered last September. But none of those made it into the to the report from COPR to the legislature.
Daryl?
Yes.
I would be interested in knowing, because when they start this process, they come to staff and they have an engagement process where they ask and they reach out to who our stakeholders are. And we put the 911 community front and center as stakeholders in this process. And I'd be curious to know, at least for the people in the room or on the phone, how many of you were reached out to?
Just
I believe Bruce told me that he was. Okay. Monica.
Well, I'm gonna provide a little feedback to COPR.
But they need to actually reach out
to ask that,
stakeholders.
because I know it's a big effort, particularly when it comes to the PUC. But we not only provided that list, but when we had our meetings with the review team, we spoke to the importance of many of these things and encouraging them to reach out and everything and get things done. So that's a little disappointing from my perspective. So in the companies too, because you all are on there too. Any outreach to you all?
Not to me.
When would it have occurred?
In 2018, last summer to fall, September, October timeframe?
Yeah, I think summer.
We actually got a lot more inquiry and contact on the sunset review for OCA.
OCC. Okay.
Long states.
That's okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think they might have contacted consultants, but I never got
And if you're interested in seeing the report that they did send to the legislature, you can get to it through the COPR website under Find a Review. There's an archive of reviews. I'm not sure how helpful it will be to you, since the final legislation that came out of it differed quite a bit from the recommendations, I think, that were in that report.
And COPR's under DORA.
It is.
Yes.
So DORA was doing a review of itself, essentially.
Yes, some people raise that as a
And that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions for me for the staff report.
Okay, DSP reports, CenturyLink.
I think the items that Daryl covered probably cover what we would report on, so I have nothing to add.
Okay. West Safety Communications, Mary Jane, do you have anything?
I don't have anything today. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. Next is standing committee reports. Agenda, Daryl.
So the presentation today is supposed to be from CenturyLink on cybersecurity. I could probably get to go on that for today. Yep. And I have received a suggestion for next time, but I really want to start getting the agenda committee more involved in deciding the presentations and the order of the presentations. So between probably in the next month, I'll be setting up a meeting with that agenda committee. If you're not on that committee, you would like to be, send me an email and I can get you on there. This is a committee that will be helping to decide what speakers or topics we have at the end of our task force meetings. So, and as always, though, if you don't want to be on the agenda committee, but you have an idea of a topic or speaker that you would like to see presented at a task force meeting, please send it to me, and that way I can share it with the rest of the agenda committee.
Next is bylaws, Kimberly.
We haven't met.
Okay.
No changes to the bylaws.
Legislative is Athena or Jackie Louise on the phone or in the room.
In their absence, I can say that we have been continuing to meet roughly every 2 weeks. They this was during the legislative session, they did reach out to, I know that Athena, Jackie, and Bruce went to speak with Senator McCluskey, and they invited me to come along, which I appreciate, essentially because she had a draft bill regarding raising 911 surcharge fees that would have also required 911 authorities to help reimburse costs for wireless carriers. They wanted to talk to her about that. At the point that they went and talked to her, the bill had already been pulled from consideration. It had never been introduced, but she had removed it from consideration. But they took that opportunity, since they already had a meeting set up with her, to talk about the rough bullet points, the 50,000-foot view of what types of things the legislative committee was looking at. They let her know that there wasn't draft language set yet, but that the legislative committee was working on that. I know there are a number of people in this room that are part of that legislative committee. I think it's important. Ultimately, I believe, and I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I believe Athena and Jackie would say that it is their intention, once we have draft language written, to bring in the larger 911 community, even if you haven't been part of these meetings. But certainly, if you want to be part of the crafting of that language, I think that that's very appropriate. So if you want to be part of that committee, please let me know, and I'll pass your name along to Athena and Jackie as the co-chairs, and we'll see if we can get you on that committee. Does anybody who's part of that legislative committee want to say anything, or do they have any comments?
Thank Joe for torching that bill. No, I think torch is the correct method.
He had one of those Elon Musk flamethrowers. I'll give you some good news on that. Not only was she very, this is Senator McCluskey I'm talking about, very interested. She asked a lot of great questions. We actually had a very, it wasn't a super long meeting, but it was longer than most meetings you get with legislators. She had a lot of great questions. She seemed very interested. She even mentioned the possibility, she wouldn't commit to anything, of course, since we don't have language written yet. She even mentioned the possibility of potentially this being one of her agenda bills that she could introduce before the session. That's assuming that we put something together. She's also said she would want to talk to other legislators who tend to work in this space and make sure she wasn't stepping on any toes. So there is some possibility that we've got a good champion there if it gets to that point. That's all I have for legislation.
Okay, equal access, Holly? Or Daryl, do you have anything?
Holly, are you on the phone? I know that Holly sent out oh no, she didn't send out a Google poll. She was going to send out a Google poll. I think she is working on scheduling a meeting to get people access committee, so we can get that up and running.
Yeah, I think it was an actual meeting announcement.
Or was there okay, there was a meeting invite that came out. It was May 30th, wasn't it? Or something like that. Girl?
On May 29th.
May 29th.
We're having a whole community day. So it would be, like she said, May 29th. Do that. And we have our NCR AFN meeting on Monday. Monday the 3rd. Okay. So my point is, we need to start talking to each other.
Yes, so there is a whole community access and functional needs meeting. It's a group of organizations that are involved in that topic for emergency management of the whole community meeting on May 29th. And I think I've sent that out to the group, but if I haven't, I can send that out. Holly and I will be attending that.
Oh, it's not closed, so there's, oh, it is closed. Oh, it's closed.
Oh, it's closed. Okay. Well, Holly and I will be attending that, and we can report back to you as well as Cheryl, I'm sure.
The meeting Holly announced is on the 30th from 12 to 1. This will be a video call.
Okay. And that committee's relatively small, so if there are other people that want to participate, I encourage that. That's all I have for equal access.
Okay, outage, you're next.
Well, I'm in the process of changing the, if you tried to look at the outages recently, you probably noticed that there is a, please watch this space, because I'm in the process of changing it to a different format. In order to track different data than I have in the past, there's certain things that we haven't been tracking that I would really like to start tracking in the future. One of them is we've always put every notification in here, whether it's part of the basic emergency service network or not, that was affected by an outage. I wanted to start tracking whether or not the outage actually was part of basic emergency service. We'll still track everything that we receive, but I wanted to be able to parse that out, whether it's part of the basic emergency service network or not. So I'm working on going back to a spreadsheet-based web page. So I don't have all the graphs back on there yet. When I do, I'll be able to post that and make it public again. In the last couple of months, we have had a few outages. So if you look at outages by year, you're currently at 10 for 2019. You look at that as of today's date, we're higher than we were last year. We only had 7 as of this date in 2018, but we're lower than the previous 2 years. We had 13 in 2017 and 12 in 2016. Just to go away, there we go.
Because it's been too wet to dig.
That very well could be part of it. This over to the side here. And outages per month, of course, we're only part of the way into May, but our big month was March. We had 5 in March and 3 in April, and then so far 1 in May. So as I put those charts back in there, I should be able to give a more complete accounting of where we're at on outages so far for the year. You can see we had Grand Junction, Colorado Springs. Here's one from Colorado Springs that was withdrawn. A lot of times we'll get notifications of a potential outage, and then after they investigate, they determine there was no impact on 911, so it's withdrawn. We've got one, Julesburg and Ovid, Durango, Holyoke, which is Sedgwick, I think, and another one from Julesburg and Holyoke. So between these 3, it looks like the northeast part of the state is having. It seems like everyone takes turns on where the issues are, and that's where the issues are right now. So again, sorry I can't give a more detailed report right now, but hopefully by the next meeting we'll rebuild so that we can do that. Does anybody have any questions?
Darryl, did you want to talk about the education document that
Oh yes, thank you very much. So one of the things the outage committee is wanting to do is to put together an educational document, essentially geared towards the PSAPs. I believe there'd probably be, especially for those that do a lot of work from the authority level, to be some application to the 911 authorities as well. Talking about the different types of outages that are possible and different mitigation strategies for different types of outages. Kimberly has done 2 presentations on this in the past and provided me with the PowerPoints from that. I've done 1, but Kimberly has also put together a sort of an outline of that document, sort of a white paper is what we're looking at doing. So on the next meeting of the outage committee, we will be going through that that outline and trying to think about how we can fill in the meat on the skeleton. The other thing we were looking at doing was creating a PSAP reporting form where PSAPs, this would be voluntary on the PSAP's part, but where PSAPs could go in and report issues that they're having, not necessarily an outage, but it could be any type of issue that they're having with network service, or even from the OSP side. It could be an OSP outage that they're experiencing, and it would show up on a live table that would be accessible to all of the PSAPs. And the idea behind this is if you're having a Verizon outage, for instance, in your PSAP service area, maybe it's not just your PSAP that's experiencing this. It would be helpful to other PSAPs, especially neighboring PSAPs, to know whether or not you're having that issue. So you could go to that table and see who else in the state is reporting the same issue. It is voluntary, so it will only be as useful as PSAPs decide to make it. But we want to try to make that an available tool and see if it's something that you as a community wish to adopt. And so we'll be working on developing that at the next outage committee meeting as well.
Since originating service providers don't have to report outages unless they're, massive number of minutes, I think that would be helpful anyway for the community to have better knowledge of, the actual outages that we're seeing.
And we know from experience that even if they are a large enough outage to require a notification from the FCC level, the PSAPs don't always get time to be notified. Or what they do get notified can sometimes conflict with what their neighbors get notified. So having that information all in one place where it can be accessed would be helpful. Do you have something, Mike? Oh, okay. Did I miss anything? Okay. That's all I have for the outage committee.
Okay. Does anybody have a prepaid or collections report?
So I haven't heard Jackie on the phone. I'll at the last meeting she said that committee is kind of on hiatus because the work it would be doing overlaps with what the legislative committee is doing. So we're just focusing everything on the legislative committee.
And the reports committee, Daryl?
So every other meeting, we have a report that has to be approved from the task force to the commission. We file that in a miscellaneous proceeding at the commission. I also send copies to the three commissioners when those get filed. This is not one of those meetings, so I don't have a report for you to approve today, but between now and the next task force meeting, we'll see a draft of that come out so that it can be approved by the task force at the July meeting. That's all I have.
Okay. Vicki, do you have a 911 Colorado Foundation report? Ed Mills, do you have a Colorado Public Safety broadband update? I know he was on his way, but he said he gave an update on the phone.
Thought I saw him on the webcast. Maybe try to get off mute. And if you're on the phone, it's *6 to unmute. If you're on the webcast, there's a red microphone at the bottom of your screen. No, I cannot. Yes, unmute so. Come on, Ed, you can do it. We could come back to them.
Yeah, PSCS report, Deanie or Carl Simpson? Glenn, do you have anything?
Hi.
Yes.
This is Amy.
Go ahead.
And we had the radio summit in early May, and it was a great summit. A lot of good information, a great talk by Dr. Nicoletti. And beyond that, we don't have any other activity.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just reiterate that that was actually a really well done summit. Good job to Glenn, who I know emceed the event. I know the PSCS had a lot of work that they did on that, and I think it came off really well. So congratulations.
Thank you. It was the focus of the PSCS to expand this from traditional radio only into the other modes of public safety communications, from broadband to 911 and next-gen 911. Daryl did a great presentation on the ESINet process in Colorado. And I would welcome any feedback and any suggestions for topics related to the 911 side of the house for future summits. So please get in touch with Daryl or me directly, and we'll be happy to try to work those into next year's summit.
I suggested that we should be right in the middle of the migration to the USINet by the time the next summit comes around, so that should be a good topic. If there are any other 911 related topics that you'd like to recommend, please email Glenn, or if you don't have his email me and I'll get you in touch with Glenn.
Thank you. Ed, are you there? *6 to unmute.
Yes, Google wasn't allowing me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
All right, here we go. So let me just give you a few highlights. I know it's been a while since we've had a report, but let me just give you a few highlights. We are having a lunch and learn on May 29th. It's going to be a conference call at noon, and it's going to be featuring Microsoft Airband initiative. We're optimistic about hearing more about the usage of white space. As we've traveled across the country, we know that there are a lot of organizations using this in emergencies. So we would recommend that you come to that. Our newsletter will be coming out shortly with all this information. But basically, you can email me. I'll give you my email at the end if you'd like to get information about that. The lunch and learn will be an hour. Second thing we'd like to let you know is that, again, we will be at Mountain Connect, and for the second year, Mountain Connect features a track focused on public safety communications. And we're excited because the Colorado Broadband Office for the last 2 years has partnered with Mountain Connect to integrate conversations on critical issues with public safety, such as next-gen 911, public safety broadband, emerging technologies and capabilities. And we are happy to say that that Daryl Branson, our own Daryl Branson, is going to be heading up a couple of sessions I think that you'll be interested in. And on Tuesday, June 25th, he will be talking about statewide migration to the Emergency Services IP network. And then on day 2, Wednesday, in the afternoon, he will be talking about 911 network diversity and resiliency. Want to let you know that if you're interested in attending Mountain Connect and attending the public safety track, we do have money, SLIGP funds, federal funds for you to attend. If you would email me or give me a call, my email is ed.mills, M-I-L-L-S, @state.co.us. My mobile number is 720-737-1079. That's 720-737-1079. Just let me know and I'll get you the appropriate documents. And the last thing, we'll be saying more about this, but we did want to let you know, if you haven't already heard, that we would ask that you please join us in welcoming Teresa Ferguson to the Colorado Broadband Office. She's going to be our Director of Federal Broadband Engagement, effective April 15th, 2019. In her role, she'll be a liaison from our office to federal broadband funding programs, and she'll also be engaging communities with their planning efforts. We will be communicating more on the detailed roles of her responsibilities through our newsletter and also at the Mountain Connect. And as you know, most of you do, Teresa comes from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, where she was actively engaged in and led various proceedings to expand provider market entry, rewrite the telecommunication rules, and advisor to the commission in next gen 911 ESI net proceeding. So that is all I have, Carl. Thank you for the time.
Yeah.
Hey, Ed, John Gavin here. First of all, you're getting a wonderful person in Teresa, so we're sad to see her go, but she's going to be doing great things for the state and your organization. Secondly, I have some experience in deploying a white space system on the Western Slope, so if you ever have any questions, of a technical nature, be happy to weigh in and help any way I can. It's an interesting technology. It's got some advantages and disadvantages, but it certainly has a place.
We would, if you could reach out to me or somehow I'll get your contact information. I would love to have a conversation with you.
Sure, will do.
Thank you.
And I attended Mountain Connect last year, and it was a good conference.
Especially if there's federal grant funds to
pay for
your trip. Why not?
That's right. Hey, it's your taxes at work.
Starting last year is when they decided to add a whole public safety track to it. So I think it's very well worth looking into. The agenda is online now.
And it just came out this morning, I think.
Yeah. And so I would definitely encourage people to take a look at that.
Hey, this is Phil in Durango. Do you guys have a website for that agenda?
Yeah, it's mountainconnect.com, I believe. It's out there. Just Google it.
All right, great. Thanks.
And then Division of Fire Prevention Control report. I don't have any report from that, but I think once that legislation gets signed, it'll roll into that.
That sounds like it's probably the case. Phil, that is mountainconnect.org.
Got it. Thanks, Daryl.
Any old business? Under new business, we have an EZNet Users Group charter that Daryl sent out earlier this week or last week.
So I guess this could have easily gone under old business since it's a continuation of the previous discussion. But so at the last meeting, I had put together sort of a guided discussion about how to craft or how to set up the framework for the ESINet users group that is required as part of the settlement that was approved by the commission for the ESINet. That ESINet users group, as I mentioned before, was discussed in that settlement as a committee of the task force. So I think it's up to this task force to approve a charter. And I took the results of that discussion from the last task force meeting and put together a draft charter. It's very simple. I didn't go into I tried to make it as straightforward as possible since we're talking about a charter of a committee of another task force. We want to get too into the weeds on it. But I can go through this piece by piece. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to, if everyone's had a chance to look through it, or we can go straight to suggestions or comments or questions about it. Which would you guys prefer? We need to go through it real quick. It's not that long. It's actually only 2 pages.
That would be a good idea.
Okay. So the first section is purpose. Essentially, this is lifted straight from the settlement agreement that was approved by the commission. It says the user group will be formed for governing bodies and PSAPs and QC staff. It will interface with CenturyLink on topics related to services under the tariff. Its purpose is to improve communications regarding the ESINet service on topics such as, but not limited to, the following: the ESINet implementation, statewide transition plans, common issues, change management, dispute mediation, and other issues. We'll include more detail on each of those items. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the purpose section? By the way, I listened to the recording again as I was going through this to make sure that I did my best to capture everything that people said during that framework discussion. But if I got something wrong or if I missed something, please let me know. Membership. Each of Colorado's 911 governing bodies, 58 of them as of the writing of this charter, are voting members of the committee. Each 911 governing body shall designate one individual to serve as their representative to the user group, but each representative may appoint one or more proxies to vote for them in their absence. Staff of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission and representatives of the BESP providing ESINet services shall also serve as non-voting members. Does anybody remember the discussion going any differently, or does anybody have any questions about that?
We use the word shall, and there are some authorities that we never hear from.
Okay.
So do we want to give them right to may? Use some language other than shall?
Does anybody have any thoughts about changing shall to may in that instance? Leave it to the Lord.
Well, my thought was that if you say in the thing that you have 58 members, or you got 58 votes in the committee, and given some of our historical lack of participation, you may have quorum problems.
Well, that
was discussed in the
yeah,
committee.
quorum is in the different section.
Shall to me.
Does anybody have any objection to changing to may? It's probably a good change. Okay.
And are other people allowed to attend as non-voting members if they're not a representative?
Yes. So that gets us to our next section, meetings. Meetings are considered open But the committee reserves the right to enter into closed session to discuss security-sensitive or negotiation-sensitive information. Non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, may be required for participation in closed sessions as needed. Closed meetings may or may not include participation for PUC staff and BESP representatives as determined by the voting members. So I wrote that paragraph to be as open-ended as possible to give the designated user group the maximum amount of flexibility. Generally, the meetings will be open according to this, but if there is something that the user group wants to discuss privately, they can. And may or may not require NDA. So it really comes down to what the discussion topic is and whether or not the user group finds that appropriate. Then I say, in attendance by 10 or more 911 governing bodies is considered a quorum. I kind of wrestled with that number, so we can talk about that if there are other thoughts on what that number should be. Votes will pass by a majority of the 911 governing bodies present. Changes to this charter may also be approved by the voting members of the task force. I think I say may also, but it says must also. In other words, since this is a committee of the task force, the charter has to be changed by the task force, not just by the members of the user group. Any thoughts on this section?
I don't know if that number 10 is right, but I can't recommend to you another number. So it's a part of it that we're live. We think about we have 58 employees. We'd like to have that number higher, but in reality, how many are in this process? So I think it's just plain dark.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember too is that this can be changed. So if 10 turns out to be too low, I would be very surprised if it turns out to be too high, but if it turns out to be too low, the user group could recommend to the task force to change that number to something else. Anyone else? Megan?
Does the user group report to the are they making recommendations to that? Or
I would say yes because it's a committee, but I don't think that's specifically laid out in here. We could add that to the purpose section if we wanted to.
I don't know if that was the intent or if the intent was just to have the users being able to talk and address issues and also engage CenturyLink on them and have the staff aware of what kind of issues people were dealing with.
I think since the settlement describes the user group as a committee of the task force, I think you could say that's implied that they would make reports to the task force. But I don't know that it's necessary either. It's kind of, I think a lot of the people who are involved in the task force will also be involved in the user group. So what do you guys think?
Doesn't matter. I mean, from my perspective as the representative of CenturyLink, it doesn't matter because, like Joe said, this is for us to talk to y'all about issues that impact the net service. And neither the committee nor the task force is like a regulatory body that will resolve any of those issues. It's not like we have a vote once. Well, it's a forum to kind of work things out so that hopefully, if we have disagreements, we can talk through them and come to some sort of consensus before somebody goes to court or to the commission to get those resolved. So if it helps to have the reports to the commission, fine. If it doesn't, also fine.
I think we're talking about reports to the task force right now.
I'm sorry, I said to the commission. I meant task force.
I think it's implied that it's part of this, it's a committee of the 911 task force, so therefore they would report to the task force. Where I'm concerned is if we're voting on something as a user group and there's disagreement or there's a tie vote, then what does that mean? Who has the authority to say, no, we're going to go this way or that way? Is it this task force or does it go back? If there's if there's a dispute within the user group, who's going to resolve that dispute? Or how does the dispute get resolved?
I have votes will pass by the think it does.
So
Since this is a different subcommittee.
maybe the user group works through that themselves, comes up with suggestions.
I think in the settlement we just looked as a task force as a convenient forum to develop the user group charter and rules out of. I don't know what they'd report on. I mean, this month CenturyLink bad, next month CenturyLink good, you know?
Well, I don't think you need to go that far, Joe. I think maybe it could just be our next meeting of the username group was, as we met last time on that state.
I think reports are fine for some.
Yeah, I mean, if there's issues or there's success, we would definitely want to get a readout of they're on schedule,
Regardless of how it's going.
I think there's also a possibility, and by the way, I think you can have those reports without that being in the charter, because we could just have a report from the chair of the user group as a standard report item. Just like we do
Yeah, I think that would be the way to do it.
on the agenda. But another possibility is, okay, so this is the purpose of the user group up here. If a topic comes up and the user group decides this isn't really appropriate for us to discuss, it doesn't fall under our purpose, but maybe it is part of a broader 911 discussion that would be appropriate for the task force, maybe they could then refer that topic back to the task force. And
Just like committees do
Yep.
today for this task force anyway.
On your question, Kimberly, though, should we put something in here that says that votes from I'm not sure this, see up here in membership, it says that each representative may appoint one or more proxies to vote for them in their absence. Should we put something down here as well that says that their votes? Seeing heads nodding.
Might just say proxy voting is allowed.
Or votes by proxies count as the same as votes by voting members?
911 governing bodies present or through proxy.
Oh, up here.
Right.
Anything else? Anybody have object to those changes? It's pretty straightforward. User group PSAP forum, this is kind of incorporating the discussion we had about the creation of a PSAP forum as part of this. In addition to regular meetings, commission staff will maintain for the users group an online discussion forum for ongoing discussion, including public safety instrument point users. One sentence, very short.
Should that be not available to the public since it's possible there would be security or other confidential stuff?
I'm not sure to what extent I can make it not available to the public. I can talk about that internally at PC as to what our options are, but
It was a closed meeting.
for the purpose of this forum would be an online discussion. We talked about making an online discussion forum. I'm not
For like
sure.
PSAP managers or personnel.
Not lighting fires to that ditch. I mean, see what the usage is of the online discussion forum, how often it gets used, what it gets used for, and if it starts to become a problem.
Anybody have any thoughts on that approach?
I guess my concern would be the moderation of it. Who's going to moderate when you get into a non-disclosure agreement conversation based on an open forum and those type of things? So the moderation of that forum, you're going to want to have some guidelines that take in place based on that.
Well, I mean, right now, we wouldn't disclose any confidential information on that public forum.
Right, but if the conversation of two people who maybe were in attendance of something started to cross over into that, you're on a public forum at that point, and there may be the potential of that. So you're going to have someone who's going to be to moderate when those lines or where those lines are in those open forums.
But that's pretty much true for any compliance with any NDA. I mean, a lot of the things that we talk about in these different procedures that we have are subject to NDAs, and we have to comply with those in a variety of communication contexts. And so I might have to pop in and say, hey, that's confidential, stop talking about it, but I don't know if we need a moderation.
So if I understand that this would be like an email listserv, and it wouldn't just be voting members, it could be dispatchers who are experiencing a problem saying, hey, has anyone else had this problem? Right. Type thing. And that's where, how much is that going to be moderated? How often is it going to be, I don't know, that Tim's going to be looking at it anyway.
I sincerely hope not.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to set it up as a Google group which is the same way I have the listserv for this group set up. Google Groups also allow you to create an online form so that it can be done either through email or you can go to a website where it shows it in a form type of format. Since it would be set up for me unless somebody else wants to do it, then I would be sending those emails. And if I see something that somebody starts having a conversation that probably shouldn't be in a public record, that would be an opportunity to step in and say something.
And Daryl, is this for the intent of sharing like operational anomalies?
So what we talked about at the last meeting was the possibility of, let's say there's an IT manager for one of the PSAPs is having a specific problem, but they want to see if anybody else has had this problem and what workarounds they come up with. They can put that on the forum and talk about it. So it could be IT managers, it could be PSAP managers, it could be a lead dispatcher. Really who it is will probably depend on the PSAP and how they're set up. But that's sort of the idea of it is to be sort of a community self-help kind of
sounding board
tool. Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Do you think this is enough for now, or do we need to put more meat in this this description?
I think for now that's enough. I think the user group could probably define it more if they need to.
Anyone else? Officers, the committee shall have a chair who shall be responsible for setting agendas and presiding over meetings, a vice chair who shall fill the role of chair in the chair's absence, and a secretary who shall keep notes and records of each meeting, including project tracking documents. Records for closed sessions shall be kept separate from open sessions and be made available only to voting members. PUC staff and appropriate ESP personnel and an NDA may be required for access.
Yeah.
Yes.
If up above, where you have it listed that PUC staff and the ESP representatives may be asked to leave a closed meeting.
Yes, I just noticed that. that conflicts with this paragraph, doesn't it?
It would also conflict when you go down below that a voting member could be staff that you're asking not to participate in the meeting. If they have an option.
Right.
So it seems that staff is very good at performing secretarial type duties because it's kind of their job now. And you could have assistant secretaries who could do that if, for example, staff is asked to leave. And then you would want to have those minutes segregated anyway, not part of the general minutes.
So I think that the point of records for closed sessions will be kept separate and available to members that participated in the closed session.
That's, I like that.
About members eligible to participate in the closed session. So if somebody wasn't there, but they wanted to find out what was discussed.
So if somebody wasn't there, the closed session was restricted to voting members. The voting member wasn't there, but they would read it later.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Okay. Made available only to, how should we word it?
Persons eligible to participate in the meeting in the closed session.
Or just voting members available only to voting members.
Could we have one?
We're not a voting member, but we should probably. If there's a closed meeting, this is a user group forum, purposes to communicate with central Lincoln. Somehow we have to know about it because we can't. If there's something that we need to know about, the bylaws should allow us to
That's why I think,
See it.
so Joe was kind of
Can't
going
solve
towards,
question.
whoever the closed session was restricted to.
Yeah.
Should have access, because if it was a closed session with voting members and BESP, that makes sense that you'd be able to see it afterwards.
Right, but if there's a need or I guess if there's a need to have a meeting without us, fine. But keep in mind, it's very difficult for us to answer questions like that.
Well, I could see where we may want to have a meeting without you in order to argue some points and get on the same page and then present it to you. I could see something like that happen where it would just be for us to collectively figure out our direction before we publicly say, here's where we want to go. So I could see where we would want to not include you for that purpose.
Well, I think that's appropriate.
Maybe it's voting members, voting and eligible members, because maybe you wouldn't be eligible in that conversation, but you would in later on.
Right, that's why I think Joe's language or whatever Joe was suggesting is probably right, because whatever it is.
Whoever will be eligible to participate
in that
meeting,
session, yeah.
see the records.
Shall be made available only to persons,
eligible to be in the meeting.
And then it's dependent upon whatever the discussion topic is.
Made available only to persons who were included in the closed session?
No, eligible for inclusion.
Oh.
Right, eligible.
To participate or be included. And then do you need language about when they go into closed session, they'll appoint a secretary?
Yeah. Yeah, but if any officer is excluded from a closed session, they will delegate their duties for the purpose. That's it.
That would be good. Sounds good.
Does that cover it?
Yeah, there's no I in delegate.
No. Gotta give it to someone else, no I. Got it. Yeah, Joe's
I'm okay.
actually. And then the officers shall be elected by the voting members of the users group at the first meeting of the users group, and then annually at the first meeting of the calendar year of the users group. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Organization as a committee of the task force chair can appoint someone to the. It is. I think that led through the previous version.
Going back to the last one, we have to have work on vacancies.
Say what?
Do we have to have a provision regarding election of officers to fill vacancies during the year?
Yes, probably. That's kind of standard.
Yeah.
But how's that sound? In the event of a midterm vacancy, the voting members of the users group shall at their next meeting vote to appoint a replacement for that officer, who shall then fulfill the remainder of the officer's term. Covered? And yes, this first, I'm guessing this whole paragraph will probably come out. Yeah. Meeting format and frequency. The users group shall meet at such times and in such forums as it chooses, but shall meet at a minimum of once per quarter, either in person or remotely.
You got it. Did you see the note?
No,
Jennifer.
Jennifer had it.
Not sure if anyone can hear me. Do we want to insert language that addresses whether the officers are reelected every year or will they be staggered? So the way it's written now, it would be every year. Do we want to do something different? And Jennifer, if you're on the phone, it's *6 on you.
No, the task force elects directors staggered for 2-year terms, but that's the director, not the directors, the voting members.
Right.
And the officers are elected every year. I don't know that we need to stagger it with, we only have 3 officers, I think.
Right. I think this could be one of those things that we try it this way, and then if this group wants to do something different, they could ask the task force to change the charter.
Jennifer said she tried *6, it didn't work.
Oh. Sorry, Jennifer. Anyone else? On this last item, then it basically just says the meeting will meet when and where it wants, but at least once a quarter. I don't know that that will ever become an issue, that the group doesn't want to meet at least once a quarter, but I think at least once a quarter would kind of meet the spirit of the settlement that's approved by the commission. If they don't meet at all, then that's not really doing what the settlement says. But if they meet at least once a quarter, then they're probably doing the minimum. What do you think?
Agree.
Okay. That's it. It's not very long, 2 pages. Is there anything that should be put in here that isn't? Any other area that can't be? Remember that the user group can make some decisions on its own. Not everything necessarily has to be spelled out in here, but if there's something that you would like spelled out in here, now would be the time to bring it up.
I sometimes see where they specify the date of the initial meeting, but I don't think you need to. The task force can just schedule that.
Well, we had talked about doing it right after today's meeting.
There you go.
I don't know if that's still the desire of the group. I will say that Motorola had intended to do a CAD presentation right after the task force meeting today. So they offered to let us do the user group in a different room.
To have the user group, we would have to have each authority designate their member. I don't know if any authorities have done that.
That's a good point. So maybe we need to set another date. And in between the first date and between now and the first date of that meeting, we would ask each 901 authority to designate their member.
So recommended.
That'll make things easier for Motorola if we do that too. Does anybody have a different approach? Do you really want to have the first meeting with the task lead usernet? Keep on saying usernet. ESINet users group today.
I think
You can't elect officers if you don't have.
We don't know who your voting members are yet. That's a good point.
Yeah, I think just
I know we were wanting to
in
move
the
ahead on
process,
this.
but also add to it some level of nagging to make sure that you get designated members for as many as 50.
Yeah,
I'm good at nagging. Yeah, I can do that.
Maybe that's something Wes can help with too.
He's right there. Oh, you say West?
West
or
or
West?
West. West Point. I didn't see it. Sorry, just wanted to.
I think that would be appropriate. It is a user group for your ESINet, so maybe we can work together, Wes.
Yep, glad to.
You're the nagging committee.
There you go, the nagging committee. In that case, Carl, I would ask that you actually call for a motion to approve this charter.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the charter?
Approve. Motion to approve.
Mike first, Cheryl second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
So it sounds like that passes. Thank you very much. I will get the final version of this when I put a date on it out to the group and put it on the UC and Resource Center website. The other question that comes up from this,
Just make sure about votes on the phone in case somebody could say no or something. I saw somebody.
Beth says yes. Anybody, if you're on the phone and you're unable to speak or we're unable to hear you, if you're on the webcast, at least please use the chat feature. Particularly if you object to us approving this charter. I think that's a no. I think it's a yes. However you want to put it.
It's a move on.
The other question then is, when do we want to have the first meeting? If we're not having it today, I think this meeting.
I'd rather sooner than later because I don't know if we want to wait another 2 months for that to happen.
Yeah, I would like to have a meeting or two before we start deploying. I think that'd be a good idea.
Can you provide
When's
a
that start?
location, Tim?
You can. You can have it in our rotten little location if you like.
You have a nicer location? I need to take a shower.
Do you have a location with a
Conference room?
Yeah, we have our storeroom.
We do.
It's just that you
Nobody
pay
has to
parking.
pay parking.
Right.
As long as it's not smoking.
Yeah.
I'll wait till first, first on 627. Sure, that's.
By Monica?
Yeah.
Okay, so what Monica's doing, this is good because we probably should mention this anyway, is that Monica, Wes Horn, and myself we've done one so far, and Monica is setting up additional meetings in different regions of the state to try to inform people who have not been part of the process until now what's in the tariff, what they can expect in terms of pricing, what the migration schedule is, and then answering their questions. So that's what that's about.
So it might be.
I don't know if it's anybody but they ask.
So the mail.
No, June 27th.
It's not too late. You think about doing it in conjunction with that?
Yeah, I think that could be a good idea.
Yeah.
So is that meeting for the whole state or is that just for some people?
Just for some people.
Well, she's
No,
reaching out
regional.
she's reaching out to PSAPs in that region.
I know
We could have a webcast for those from outside the region too.
I know the 27th I would be able to make it.
Here's another idea. How about I reach out to the authorities first, find out who their designee is, and then do a Google poll and find out what date. With that many people, you'll never find a date that works for everyone, but we can get a date that accommodates the majority. What do you guys think of that approach?
Yeah.
And then I can work with someone to find a meeting space outside of downtown Denver to host the meeting.
Works. That'll work.
Okay. And I think that covers item A under new business.
Thank you.
Watch paint dry.
Yes.
And B, PSAP contingency planning workshop. Lynn?
Well, good morning again. Just a little bit of background on the process. I'm the state's contact with U.S. Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's Emergency Communications Division, and they provide technical support to the states for various projects. And I was approached by Bruce Romero and Monica Million about putting together a workshop for PSAP contingencies as one of our technical assistance offerings this year. Was able to get that approved, and we are scheduled for the 24th of May. This will be at my office at South Metro Fire, 9195 East Mineral, down in Centennial. I want to invite everybody to attend if you're interested in putting together a continuity of operations plan. So if you ever have to evacuate your PSAP, have a plan in place as to where to go, how to get things taken care of. The ECD has recently completed a project for the state of Minnesota, and they put together a pretty good plan to help them. Their structure is different than Colorado's, but it's got some common elements, and they will share those as a means to be ready for when that ugly day happens if you have to evacuate. We've got at least a dozen people already scheduled to attend. As we're not too far out, the sooner I know you're attending, the better it will be, so I can make sure we have appropriate facilities for you. If you want to pick up a card from me, shoot me an email or a phone call, and we will get you scheduled in. I've got 2 rooms reserved. Will depend on how many people we get signed up as to which one we use, but we'll have room to take care of as many as want to attend. It'll be at 8 in the morning to noon. And this will be laying the groundwork, getting the process started. There may or may not be further meetings or conference calls to do some follow-up on it, but initially we'll start with this 4-hour workshop on the 24th.
Is this focus on cybersecurity? Does it include any reason somebody might need to bug out, like storm or earthquake?
Yeah, anytime you might have to evacuate a facility, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's weather, or for whatever reason your facility may not be accessible, just to have those plans in advance.
Darryl, can I mention, after reviewing the after-action report that you sent out from the Washington State situation, the thought was going through my mind that I think it's important to, at some juncture, involve emergency managers and others in these conversations, especially looking at that after-action report and how those agencies had to respond to assist when the 911 system failed. I just want to mention that, and we should all think about that as we discuss these matters.
That's a great point. The Washington report had spelled out how the State Emergency Operations Center was activated. They thought it should have been activated at a higher level, but also local EM offices would be important to bring into that scenario.
Have you invited the EM offices to this workshop on the 24th?
You know, I hadn't, and it's a great point.
I'm wondering if that might not be a bad idea.
I agree.
Cool. Any questions for Glenn? I think I have the next item. I just wanted to bring this up briefly. The FCC has a public safety support center. It's an online portal. I haven't had a lot of opportunity to use it, thankfully. It's meant to be a place where PSAPs and other 911 officials can report items to the FCC that affect 911. And so I wanted to point this out. This is even older than I thought it was. So in March of 2017, this is not too long after the public safety portal had been created by the FCC, I had talked to several PSAPs in north central Colorado that had experienced an outage from one of the originating service providers. It's not something the PUC generally has jurisdiction over, but they wanted to know what could be done about the fact that they didn't receive any notification from the originating service provider about the outage. So I got all 3 of their contact information together and put together a report based on what they told me they experienced and sent that to the FCC through the Public Safety Support Center. And we received this response: said your report, including attachment, was reported to the appropriate personnel for review. That was March 28th of 2017. And then March 29th of this year, I received a notification from them that the information you have provided has been referred to the Cybersecurity Communications Reliability, or CCR division. So that is a 2-year and 1 day turnaround just to tell me you're still looking at it.
Cool. Wow.
So I wanted to let you guys know that we received that and what the delay was on it. I don't know if any of you have tried sending something to the FCC's Public Safety Support Center. If maybe this is an anomalous experience. I hope it is. It sounds like it's not. So you guys have had similar problems? Never received, none of just 2 years?
It was at least actually more than.
Why don't you print that out and send that to Pod?
I'm thinking that might be necessary. And maybe what we need to do is use this as an example, but then maybe reach out to Vicky and other PSAPs that have tried using the support center. That's put together a list of what the experiences have been in Colorado and say, this isn't working. You guys need to increase the staffing or have some oversight of how this is operating or something. Because this is supposed to be a public safety support center. And if this is a typical experience, then that's a problem.
So, Carol, I'm just going to say this because we deal with the FCC on a lot of things and the ways they do things. And, you know, it's national, they're large, and these kinds of things simply don't rise to their time and attention as much as they put out contacts or you can go through the web. So if there is interest in trying to address this issue and everything and how we might do it or suggest it differently, and we sincerely want to make an impact there, I think we just have to pick a different path than going about doing it that just works it at higher levels in different ways to bring it. There's different ways to bring attention to this kind of stuff. We'll keep banging our heads against the wall. We keep trying to use what they're doing, how we do it. So I would suggest that maybe we use our role in our association that deals with the FCC and do it that way. Even including, we always have a February meeting in Washington, D.C. That's a great time and opportunity for it to actually get together with people in person out there and stuff like that.
And by dealing with it, you mean approaching them with the issue regarding the responsiveness of this?
Yeah, and what we really want and what are the opportunities to look to do it differently, because it's, you know, like many government things, it's like turning the Titanic to get a big process. They have a set process for this that they all approve and do and how they do it, and so changing those things is.
Well, I think you make a very good point that NARUC, the national organization, might be a good forum for that, and I think NASNA, I can certainly reach out to the other NASNA contacts and say, has anybody else tried using this support center, and what's been your experience? And if they've had similar experiences, we could put together a thing with NARUC and NASNA.
Yeah, and those kind of pressures. Anytime you, like for us, it's just having the NARUC people are located in Washington, so they can, if we authorize them to and say we want this done, they can spend the time and effort. They know the people and going over and seeing if there's more to do. Yeah, that's true. That's always a good one. Congratulations.
Especially if they're running for office.
Yeah.
She said senators.
So is this how government-run healthcare is supposed to work?
No, that's actually much better. That actually is much better.
So Daryl,
Yes.
March of 2016, I did, I was just pulling it up to make sure that I recalled this correctly, but I did open up an issue using the portal, and I got a response back to say. So I can send you this as well. My experience is different, but I was also in a sub-one situation, and I was working with having issues with some wireless carriers, and so it was reported that way as being critical issues, so maybe it wasn't the way it was reported.
Well, and I don't want to, only present them with negative evidence. Maybe the issue is not that it's always bad, but there's spot or that unless it is a critical issue, they don't get back to you.
Yeah, and generally when you work with people directly, it's not necessarily intentional. It hurts and they want to do good and right things. It's just.
Well, my guess is, and this was one where the outage was over, right? We were just letting them know this was an issue.
Mine wasn't in progress.
And yours was in progress, so it could be that in progress things are going to the top and being handled right away, and there's a list of not in progress problems that are 10,000 items long, and they just don't have the personnel.
And sometimes to me, what then that's indicative of is it is appropriate to work on big in progress things is that we have a need out here for some information, doing things that we can never get to and do because they're otherwise precluded from we're otherwise precluded from getting information and doing things, but yet it never rises to that level. So sometimes the solutions in these are not just fix your center, but other things that may need to happen to satisfy whatever the need is we have, and they're just not. They don't realize they're in the way on those things.
Connie mentioned on the pop-up that she had received a call within 30 minutes. So
Yeah.
it may have been a priority of service. It may have been
Yeah.
something in that. It'd be interesting though, because I mean, I've never realized that that tool was out there. So maybe it's a lack of utilization to get that feedback to maybe to get the educational process out and start using the tools.
And we should include this in the so we can think this is long for the piece hours.
True.
And looking at my notes, they responded that they also called me as well, so. But it was again, in progress.
So it should just kind of get an education process out there and then see if that is truly the case. If 2 years is maybe the variable or norm, who knows at this point.
Or maybe it's one of those, if you have an in-progress problem, this is an appropriate tool. If it's not in progress, sure, use it, but don't expect a response.
Yeah.
That's all I had, but we can, I'll do some more work on that, maybe reach out to NASNA and find out if other states have had experiences with this and what those experiences have been, and maybe come back to the task force with a recommendation at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
And then I think Kimberly's point, we can also talk about it in the outage committee.
It wasn't on my radar or
Right. Okay.
State next gen 911 plan discussion.
So, a couple months ago, the National 911 Office issued an update of a template that they've had for several years now. The template was really kind of out of date, but they issued a template for putting together a state next gen 911 plan. There's a link in here. I get it to work. Of course. So I can't show you the template because 911.gov is currently undergoing maintenance. That link should hopefully work once they're done with their maintenance. But in the meantime, what this template does is it goes through section by section their recommendations as to what should be included in the state's next gen 911 plan. Colorado does not have a state 911 plan. At one point, while I was still with the Resource Center, we worked on trying to put together a state 911 plan, but because the Resource Center is not a state agency and obviously does not have the authority to say this is the plan, it didn't really resemble a plan. It resembled more of a vision document, and it was still useful in that regard. But I think maybe a more appropriate venue to talk about a state next gen 911 plan would be the task force, which is actually tasked by commission rule with advising the commission and through that the state on 911 issues. I wish I could show you the template of the plan today. But if,
I was just able to navigate to it and maybe try again.
Okay, try.
I was actually trying to take a screenshot of it. And it was undergoing maintenance.
Let me try.
I can do it.
See, I just got in too.
Yeah.
It's like a 72 bit, yeah. Report.
Could be because I'm on a Chromebook here. I don't know. Usually it works just fine, but. Plot. Okay, it's not going to pull it up for me. What I can do though is after the meeting today, I can send out, get a copy from the computer. Apparently it doesn't like Chromebook. And send that out to the group to look at. This is not necessarily time sensitive, but I think for purposes of future federal 911 grants, to the extent that they may have them, there is actually a bill that's not been introduced but is in circulation to create an ongoing federal 911 grant program. I think it would be very helpful to have a plan that has been approved by the task force that can be used as an attachment to those applications. Well, I'll send out the template for it, and maybe we can have because we're almost out of time today, maybe we can have a longer discussion on this topic at the next task force meeting as to whether this is something we want to try to pursue, developing a plan with a stakeholder group of 911 authorities and PSAPs to help put that together.
And Daryl, does it extend beyond our tariff to operational matters, or?
So it has, first of all, it's both descriptive and prescriptive. So it has descriptive sections where it talks about what 911 is in the state of Colorado, how it operates. The tariff will be part of that description because it is an existing piece of guiding documentation. But it's also prescriptive in that it says this is where the 911 community would like to go with 911 in Colorado. And these are just some steps that we think we can take as a community to make that happen, which I think would be very helpful from a planning point of view. This may also be something that is more appropriate to the ESINet users group. I don't know that, but that could be something the users group consider looking at if they want to try to do that, because it would fit right in with their discussions going forward as to what future features or functions they would like to see as part of that ESINet. I just wanted to bring up the topic today. I can send out that template and then maybe we can have a longer discussion on it at the next meeting. What do you guys think?
And I wonder also if, sending it once it's drafted, perhaps sending it out to the authorities would stimulate, conversation and discussion and maybe better participation of the task force.
Absolutely. And I think even if that might help give them another channel for participation too, because if they aren't able to participate in the users group or the task force, if they get a copy of that and decide to provide comments, at least gives them another avenue for participation.
It almost sounds like it might be already had a lot of stuff for that in the 911 reports we do to talk about the history of where we are and what projects we're working on now. And so that would just be the things that we aren't working on, but the vision things we'd like to work on.
I agree. I think a lot of it probably does overlap with the State of 911 report to the legislature that we do. But I think there's some parts that don't overlap too. I think it would create more of a parking lot for ideas for the future. It wouldn't be binding by any means. If we put something in the Synergy 911 plan, we have to do it. But it would be a way to kind of solidify as a community what we think 911 should look like in the future for the state. Potentially. So I'll send out that template, and we don't have to make any decisions today, but I want to bring that up, that is available now. I'd looked at the previous version before, but it was really too out of date to really be that useful. But because this has just recently been updated by a committee of 911 stakeholders from across the country, I thought we should just take a look at it. I think that's all I have.
Okay.
Does it include kind of vision, some of the things they put in that are vision type things that we might not even be thinking about yet?
They did put in some examples of things that you could put in each section. That might help spur our thought processes when we look through. And knowing that other states are also going through this process too, if you've been published theirs or provide drafts through NASDA, we can also look at those and see what other states are putting in those sections and see if that sparks any ideas for us.
Okay, discussion regarding mitigation of unforeseen network issues.
If we want to end at noon, I've only got 3 minutes, but essentially this after report that we got from the state of Washington, it didn't focus on the cause of the December 27th, 28th issue from CenturyLink, but it focused more on how the state, and especially the emergency management branches of the state of Washington, dealt with the outages that they experienced. And I think generally what I put this on here for is I don't know that we have really, when these things come up, I don't know that we really go into the detail and discuss them in the level of inquiry that really they deserve. So for instance, the December 27th, 28th item, Tim Kunkelman came to the January task force meeting and gave a brief overview as to what happened. Other states that were more directly impacted by it have looked into it in more depth, including the state of Wyoming, which did public hearings on it. State of Washington has a ongoing proceeding at their Public Utilities Commission regarding this topic. But as the task force, especially as we get ready to start migrating to the emergency services IP network. I'm wondering if it might not be appropriate for this task force to look at these types of issues in more detail. Recently, there was another issue with Jefferson County Jefferson County's 911 center. JeffCom, yeah. On April 5th, there was a small TDOS attack. It was not very impactful, but the fact that there was one is concerning to me. And I've asked Mr. Kunkelman for some details on that, and he hasn't been able to get back to me yet, but I'm hoping to find out more on that soon as to what happened and what CenturyLink was able to do to mitigate that issue. But given that we're out of time today, I'm wondering if maybe the appropriate thing to do would just be to ask if anybody has any objections to us looking at this further at the next meeting, maybe looking at not specifically one issue like the December 27th, 28th outage or the April 5th PDOS attack, but then looking at how can we discuss these things in more detail and have a more be able to look at it in a way that will help us inform us for the future.
And I think it, Daryl, I think it's important in the sense of not so much, you know, it might have been an outage that occurred somewhere else that's informative to us, wasn't maybe as impacting in Colorado, but something that could happen in the future. And just like with Washington and what came out in their report, it caused them to step back and think about how are their communications processes working across their state better, with their carriers better, and things like that. So I think it's good to take the opportunities to really understand what are the kinds of things that can be happening, why are they happening, how are they being mitigated in the future, how do we handle them as across the state as we're going forward and with the right people involved. So I think it's a good idea that will just strengthen all of the operating work we do in relationships with our carriers going forward if we start looking at these in a little more depth.
And another thing to think about too is whether or not the task force is the appropriate discussion forum for that, or maybe the users group would be more appropriate, since what we're talking about is 911 call delivery, which would be part of the assignment.
It's going to probably get technical, and I think that discussion may happen a little bit more in that group, particularly in the Jeffco scenario where it was a multi-state event, and each one handling it differently. I think there's a lot of lessons learned from that because that could be presented to the task force at that point. But I think apologize, the April 5th one. At the same time, the April 5th event happened. There was Mesa, Arizona had one. There was a multi-state attack at that point.
There were several PSAPs in Arizona, one in Florida.
Yeah. So it was. There's a lot of lessons learned, I think, from a lot of those events, and I think that there may be more technical discussion in that, just based on that, but a presentation from that. So I would recommend potentially a user group scenario with recommendations based on some of those lessons learned for the operational.
And I think it'd be helpful to get the information from the other states. We might probably have Arizona. I think our initial look into it, at least on the CenturyLink side here, because we didn't get notice of it until you sent us that email. Our initial look at it was there was very few calls, and so our initial hypothesis was that it was a robocaller machine that accidentally, they generate computer numbers, and there's a 10-digit number associated with every 911 trunk, and it hit some of those 911 trunks. I mean, they aren't published numbers, but they are 10-digit numbers. If it hits those numbers and makes a call, and then repeats that call a couple of times as a robodialer would, then it can look like a TDOS attack, but
It wasn't, because you can tell from the alleys.
Yeah, you don't get the alley.
And it wasn't.
Yeah, so having that additional information to have a more in-depth technical discussion, I think would be very helpful. That's what sure when we looked at it, at least at the surface level that my attorney bring the data to look at, that's what we saw, at least as our initial hypothesis.
Well, and certainly I don't think it'd be fair to ask CenturyLink to comment something that you haven't had a chance to put together information about yet either, but.
No, and I think having the information from other places in Colorado and across the country could be helpful for doing that. So Bill can probably talk about that a little bit this afternoon. I can talk I think we should postpone this for a little bit, but I can talk for a couple minutes about the Washington report and the December outage. I don't know. If you want to put that off till next time, I can do it.
Well, I've got a couple things. I mean, I think there's a couple things in the report, and we've kind of bounced around on them. One is, yes, I believe the discussion of the actual events and the technical aspect needs to be held. But I think also another thing that was very alarming in there was the communication piece of the notification and that. And I don't know if that's something that maybe would fall under the outage committee that looks at generating a standard within Colorado of what that notification process is, how that works, who's involved. And I think that was very aware in that report that a lot of people didn't know what was going on and who was doing what and what those communication paths were. I think that's something to bring out to look at. How's that work in Colorado? What does that look like? I know what I do when I do an outage, but what's the best way to do that and how to communicate not only with media, but at the state level as well and the vendor as well. And I think that's something maybe that needs to go into the outage committee, which if that's the case, I would like to be a part of that. But I think also the technical side of actual what happened in those type of events, yes, they do need to be addressed, I think, in a PUC setting.
So I would add how that might change as we migrate to NG911.
Yeah.
So a couple thoughts on that. One is I think you're absolutely right. That very well could be a good topic for the outage committee, and I'd be happy to take that up. Second of all, since you mentioned being part of it, I'll also say that is probably the smallest committee we have, even though it's a very important topic. So anybody who's interested in being part of that committee, please send me an email, let me know so I can get you on the list. At our last meeting, it was just me and Kimberly. We had a good discussion, but
Got a lot done.
So I think that is a very good topic for the outage committee. And I think it also really dovetails in with the contingency report that under our rules, CenturyLink files every year. They just did it for 2019. But making sure that, for future versions of that, or maybe even adding to this one, if there are other pieces of information that need to be in there about how that communication happens between the 911 service provider, being CenturyLink, and the PSAPs, and making sure that that communication contact information exists on both sides, and what to do if that contact information is unreachable. So I think having all of that available to both CenturyLink and the PSAPs can only help.
And I absolutely agree, but real quickly, and I won't go into a lot of details about this, but I think it's important to recognize some of the differences between Washington and Colorado and how the outage hit both states. Actually, I'm not supposed to say outage because really we call it an event because, and when we started calling it an event, I thought that's lawyer wiggle words and stuff, but really the way that it happens is that sometimes it was congestion. I didn't have any impact to my internet service at home, but other people did. And some of it was congestion and slow. Some would be completely out. But it was an outage on one of the 6 transport layers that the CenturyLink family of companies has on the internet backbone. We have 6 of those. This was an outage on one of them. Remember, in Washington, we are no longer the EZNet provider. We are transitioning out of that role. If you look at the report there, it's important because I looked at it first and I said, no, this is completely wrong. And part of that was because I looked at it and I saw CT. That's Comtech. So if you look at that report, CT is Comtech, CTL is CenturyLink. It's very confusing how they do their acronyms in the report. But there are several, so Comtech is now the EZNet provider for Washington. We're transitioning out of that. There are several PSAPs that we serve in Washington on a transitional basis. They have some, we have others. All the ones that were on the CenturyLink EZNet remained up the whole time. Comtech's went down. And I'm not gonna speak to why contacts went down, that's for them to address. You know, they are the vendor, Comtech is, and we worked with them, on that side as their vendor to the, and they are the vendor then to the state of Washington. But we're in a slightly different role there. Here in Colorado, we are the throat to choke. We are the ones that are supposed to notify the PSAPs. In Washington, that's Comtech. But I think there are important lessons to be learned from Washington for us to learn as the primary vendor of an EZNet service. But I think this is a bad outage, and it was a very unfortunate thing because it was an internet level outage that affected a lot of customers for multiple days, and so that was a really bad thing. But if there is a silver lining out of it for the state of Colorado, it is that it shows that the EZNet that we're going to do in Colorado is engineered to withstand and be resilient against those types of outages. And so, I mean, that's at least, I guess, some sort of silver lining there. And we can talk more about the specifics of it later, but I did want to kind of bring up that high level stuff.
Well, that's great. That's great information, and I think that's exactly the kind of information that this group and the outage group needs to have, because that's great to hear. So then it's like, okay, let's do a deep dive and let's understand it more and explain it why we're protected, or is there a risk there that this exposed that we need to make some adjustments so we didn't have an outage, but maybe that exposed something that we need to consider. So this kind of dialogue is essential.
Yeah, the outage committee, users group, both, I think are important forms for these type of discussions.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what I'm talking about, not necessarily, I don't want to focus, we do need to look at these two issues, the December and the April events. But what I want to try to get in place is sort of a ongoing discussion that not necessarily even talking about central leak outages. Are there other outages in other parts of the country that we can learn lessons from? You know, the AT&T, even though it was an OSP outage, it was so massive that it affected the ability for people to call 911, large numbers of people to call 911. There was a cascade event affecting it was either Houston or Dallas's 911 system about a year ago that could provide some lessons learned. I think maybe the outage committee really is the best place to look at that and really in a lot of detail, and then maybe come back to the task force with some analysis and some lessons learned from the outage committee, especially if we get more people to participate. That'll make that work a little easier. Joe?
So I know over the years I've kind of said, gee, we have these outage reports that we have, and it just lists what they are, and we never talk about, is there anything we do to prevent them? Most of the outages are fiber cuts, are vermin activity, that sort of thing. I think the PUC should have responsibility for saying, gee, this outage, maybe the one in southwest Colorado where people are shooting out lions or whatever, would be the body to say, this is a Colorado outage that we should do an after action report and look at and see how it worked, how people responded, for us to learn from our own experiences. I don't know how much Colorado PSAP people are aware of what's going on all over the country, or how much that stuff you get through NASDA, you know, to also identify, gee, this is one we should be looking at, you know, to see, you know, anytime there's one that's big enough that there's an after action report that gives us details, we should probably be trying to look at. But we should also be identifying when there are outages here that we should be looking at. And I think the PUC is the one to drive that process using the resources of the task force, the users group, the outage committee.
I can talk about that internally with the PUC and see what's that might have a discussion with other commissioners and see
What's going to be really interesting is when we find out that a lot of those fiber cuts are from CDOT. Because the sort of rule in state government is you don't shoot inward. It doesn't bother me to shoot inward. It needs to be shot. But there's
But that would identify the information so we can do the shooting.
has been, always will be a big cutter of our fiber because a lot of our fiber is in their road and they do a lot of construction on their road. So yes, they're a big cause of the problem, but I don't think that we can get them out of their lead role.
No, I don't think so either.
I mean, they can be better. Certainly, we can improve processes. But, just because they have a lot of, I don't want to point too many figures out.
To the extent we're talking about fiber cuts, I mean, fiber cuts will always happen. So that's why you have to look at network diversity and you have those workshops going too, so it kind of dovetails in with that discussion.
And that's why the standard outages that we have, it doesn't make sense to say, well, can we do a fiber cut when we have 20 of them a year, we look at it 20 times, come with the same answers. But when we had this situation in Southwest Colorado that had such a large impact and was unusual, even though it might still be a fiber cut, but with a bullet, I don't understand all the ramifications of that, but that might be one we should be looking at.
You need a diverse power source for your laptop right now?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm down to 6%. I think because some of us may be having low blood sugar and my laptop is having low power. Carl, I think maybe that would be a good place to
close the meeting.
Discussion.
Can we just, good discussion, just so we decide that the outage committee would bring these forward, and we have the conversation of outage committee, we would have it there, if it needs to happen at the task force, we would have it there. I just want to make sure that I know what we're doing with that, since I want the outage committee.
It sounds like we've got some more interest in participating in the outage committee, and I would suggest maybe that would be the best place to start. And if it makes sense to move it to the user group, we could do that later, and at least initiate the conversation with the outage committee. I'm seeing some other heads nod. That's okay.
Anything for open discussion. We won't be having a 911 resource center after this meeting. We canceled that because of we were going to have the user group right after that, after this meeting. So we don't have a meeting today.
So at the close of this meeting, though, there'll be lunch and then the cybersecurity presentation from CenturyLink, so don't leave. And then I believe Motorola, that's the reason for all of these screens, Motorola has set up a CAD demonstration for those who want to stay after that.
So we're not on a time for them to get out of the room for the cybersecurity.
I think they wanted to get started before 1.
Okay.
So I don't know how long you guys need for your presentation, but.
So we grab our food and we can start.
Sounds good. So those of you on the phone, I'm just going to leave this on, but we'll be starting again as soon as everyone gets their food and gets sit down.